Welcome to Fear Spiral, the place where the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains come alive and abandoned cabins hide secrets you won't forget. Tonight, you're about to hear 15 true haunted cabin encounters, stories told in first person, as if you were there feeling every creak, every whisper, every shadow creeping through the forest. Be prepared. Some doors are better left unopened and some stories are better left untold. If you dare, stay with me until the end. The lantern outside my cabin. I don't usually talk about this night, but every fall when the air gets cold and the woods go quiet, I find myself thinking about it again. My name's Daniel. I'm 34 now, but this happened when I was 26. Back then, I'd just started working as a wildlife photographer, trying to build a portfolio. I spent a lot of time alone in the Appalachian Mountains, following trails and renting out cheap cabins to stay near my subjects. I was comfortable being alone in the wood until that one night near Boone, North Carolina. It was October of 2017. I'd rented an old cabin at the base of Grandfather Mountain, not one of those modern Airbnbs, but a creaky, two-room structure that looked like it had been standing since the 50s, the kind of place that smelled like damp wood and burnt coffee even before you unpacked. The owner was a local named Mr. Kemp. He gave me the key, told me to watch for bears, and left without saying much else. The first 2 nights were peaceful, the kind of silence only deep woods can give you, where the only sound after sunset is the crackle of your fire and the occasional owl somewhere out in the black. But on the 3rd night, something changed. It was around 2:30 a.m. I'd gone to bed after reviewing some photos on my laptop, mostly owls and raccoons I'd captured on my trail camera earlier that day. The fire had burned low, and the only light in the cabin came from the moon through the window. I was just drifting off when I heard something. Faint at first, but sharp enough to wake me. It sounded like footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate steps right outside the cabin. At first I thought maybe it was a deer or a black bear. I'd seen both around the area. But then I heard the unmistakable clink of metal, like something being set down on the porch. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The sound stopped, and for a moment all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Then, very faintly through the window, I saw it. A lantern. An old-fashioned oil lantern glowing dimly, sitting on the porch rail. I hadn't put it there. My stomach dropped. I told myself maybe it was Mr. Kemp. Maybe he came by to drop something off. But who does that at 2:30 in the morning? I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my boots, and crept to the window. When I shined the beam outside, the lantern was still there, but the forest beyond it looked completely empty. Just black trees and fog. I thought about calling out, but something in me, instinct maybe, told me to stay quiet. So I just stood there staring at that lantern for what felt like minutes. The light from it flickered slightly as if disturbed by wind. But there was no wind. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A low, rasping voice from somewhere in the dark, maybe 15, 20 feet from the porch. It whispered, "Light's for you." "Ain't it?" I froze. I swung the flashlight toward the trees, but the beam hit nothing. Just empty woods. The voice didn't come again. I backed away from the window and locked the door. Not that the thin wood would stop anyone determined to get in. I turned off my flashlight, sat in silence, and listened. The footsteps came again, slow, circling the cabin now. I could hear the crunch of dry leaves, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. Then, 3 slow knocks on the front door. I couldn't move. I just sat there, every muscle locked. Whoever it was didn't try the handle, didn't say anything. They just knocked, waited, then walked around to the back. I heard the porch boards creak under their weight. That's when I decided I wasn't staying the night. I packed my camera bag, grabbed my keys, and slipped out through the window on the opposite side. My car was about 50 yards down the trail. I kept my flashlight low, moving as quietly as I could through the trees. Halfway there, I turned back, just once. There was someone standing on the porch holding that same lantern. I could see the shape. Tall, thin, head tilted slightly to one side. The light flickered across what looked like a long coat, maybe even overalls. But what made my blood run cold was the face, or the lack of it. From that distance, the lantern glow caught on nothing but pale skin, blank and featureless. I bolted. When I finally got to my car and started it, I swear I saw movement in the rearview mirror, the glow of the lantern weaving between the trees. keeping pace for a few seconds before fading into the dark. I didn't stop driving until sunrise. When I returned the cabin key later that morning, Mr. Kemp looked uneasy. I told him what happened, left out the part about the faceless figure, just said someone had come by during the night. He shook his head slowly and said, "You saw a light, huh? You shouldn't have gone looking at it. My granddaddy used to say some lanterns out there don't belong to the livin'." He wouldn't say anything else. To this day, I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe my tired mind played tricks on me. But sometimes when I'm editing photos late at night, I catch myself glancing out the window, half expecting to see that faint orange glow swaying in the dark. And every time I drive past Boone in October, I notice something on the side of the old forest road, a small wooden cross stuck into the ground, and next to it a rusted lantern. The cabin with two doors. This story took place in the fall of 2019, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. I was 29 at the time and between jobs, picking up odd work wherever I could. A friend of mine named Rob had a cousin who owned a small vacation cabin up in the hills outside a town called Hazard. He needed someone to house sit for a week, feed his dog, keep an eye on the place, and make sure no one broke in. He offered me $300 and a free stay. I figured it was an easy gig. I got there on a Thursday afternoon. The cabin was isolated, perched halfway up a mountain ridge surrounded by a mess of pine and oak trees that looked like they'd been there for centuries. It wasn't fancy. Just one bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a small back deck that overlooked the slope. I noticed something odd right away, though. There were two front doors. They were side by side, about 6 feet apart, both painted the same faded red. One had a normal handle and a keyhole, the one I used. The other was locked tight with a thick iron latch. I remember joking about it with Rob when I called to check in. He laughed and said, "Yeah, I know, man. That cabin's weird. My cousin said one door's just there from the original design. Leads nowhere. Don't mess with it." I didn't think much of it after that. That first night was calm. The air was cold enough that you could see your breath outside, and the forest made this soft rustling sound that almost lulled you to sleep. Around 11:45 p.m. I let the dog, a big black Labrador named Boone, out one last time. He was friendly and calm, but when he stepped onto the porch, his whole body stiffened. His ears went back and he started growling low. I shined my flashlight down the slope, thinking maybe there was a raccoon or coyote, but the woods were still. Boone refused to leave the porch, just stared into the dark. Eventually, I brought him back inside. At around 2:10 a.m., I woke up to him barking, sharp, frantic barks, the kind that means something's not right. I stumbled out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and saw him standing at the living room window, staring toward the porch, and that's when I heard it, knocking. 3 slow knocks on one of the doors. Not the one I used to enter. The other one. The door with the iron latch. I froze. The sound was so deliberate, spaced out perfectly. Thud. 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 Boone growled deep in his chest, but didn't move from the window. My mind was racing. Who the hell would come up here at 2 in the morning? There wasn't another cabin for at least 2 miles. I stood there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to happen again. But the knocking stopped. I tried peeking through the side window, but it was pitch black outside. The porch light barely reached the second door. After a few tense minutes, I convinced myself it must have been tree branches, or maybe Boone bumping something. I went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easy. The next night, I kept a closer ear out. It was around 12:40 a.m. when I heard the noise again, this time softer, like a faint scratching against wood. I crept into the living room, flashlight in hand, and realized it was coming from inside the wall, right behind that second door. It sounded like something dragging its fingers along the inside of it. I backed away slowly, and Boone started whining. He paced the floor, tail tucked between his legs, eyes locked on that door. The scratching went on for about a minute, then stopped as suddenly as it began. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, I decided I'd had enough. I called Rob's cousin and told him what I'd been hearing. He went quiet for a long time before saying, "Don't touch the other door, it's sealed for a reason." I asked what that meant, but he wouldn't explain. He just said to keep Boone with me and ignore it. That night I did something I regret. I was tired, anxious, and running on no sleep. Around 1 a.m., after hearing soft thumps from the same wall again, I grabbed a flashlight and a hammer. I wanted to prove it was nothing, maybe a raccoon trapped in the crawl space. I unlatched the iron bar, which was rusted stiff but gave way after a few hits. When I pulled the door open, I expected a closet or maybe just insulation. Instead, it opened to a narrow hallway, pitch black, cold air pouring out like from a freezer. The smell hit me immediately, something damp and rotten like earth and old wood. I shined my light down the hall, and it went on farther than the cabin should have allowed. It didn't make sense. The layout outside didn't match this interior space. About 10 feet in, the light caught something on the wall, deep scratch marks vertical as if made by fingernails. Boone barked from behind me, panicked, but I couldn't move. Then I heard it again. That slow scratching, this time echoing from deeper inside the hallway. I slammed the door shut and latched it. I sat awake the rest of the night, listening to faint movement from behind that door. Soft steps, the sound of breathing. By morning, I packed up and left. I told Rob to tell his cousin I was done. I didn't even want the payment. 2 weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I tried looking up the property online. There was almost nothing, but I did find an archived local article from 1986 about a family who lived in that same cabin. According to the piece, a flash flood had hit the area, and rescuers found the family's bodies inside a sealed storage room, which had no windows, only a door that led into the main cabin. The article said the room was permanently closed after that. The cabin still stands today. Every once in a while, I think about Boone growling at that door, about how the air felt colder when I opened it. Sometimes, late at night when the wind hits my apartment just right, I swear I can hear it, that faint, slow scratching, like something still waiting to be let out. The Whisper from the Creek. This happened in late October of 2020, not far from Harlan, Kentucky, where my uncle owned a tiny, weather-beaten cabin that sat right next to a narrow creek. The creek ran down from the hills, maybe 6 feet wide, cold and fast-moving, and the cabin stood so close you could hear it flowing even with the windows closed. At the time, I was 24 and struggling. My fiancée had just left me. My job had shut down because of the pandemic, and I needed to clear my head. My uncle offered me the cabin for a week. He warned me that the area was quiet enough to drive you crazy, but I thought solitude would help. I drove up one gray afternoon, reaching the place just as fog started to roll in from the ridges. The cabin was old, one story, wood-paneled walls, a tin roof that ticked when acorns fell on it. The porch faced the creek, and a little wooden bridge crossed over to a hiking trail on the other side. I set my stuff down, made some instant coffee, and by nightfall, the fog had thickened into a ghostly curtain that swallowed the trees. That first night was uneventful, except for the constant gurgle of the creek. It wasn't a bad sound, kind of soothing, but it was constant. No matter how quiet everything else got, the water never stopped whispering. By the second night, the peace had turned heavy. The fog hadn't lifted all day, and the air felt colder, like something had shifted. Around 1 a.m., I was sitting on the porch steps smoking when I heard it. A voice. It came from the direction of the creek. At first, I thought it was the water playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A man's voice, soft and low, saying something like, "Come down. Please." I froze. The sound was faint, almost blending with the creek's rush, but there was emotion in it, desperation. I stood there, straining to hear more, but the voice faded. I even called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer, just the steady burble of the water. I tried to convince myself it was an echo from the woods, or maybe a drunk hiker camping nearby. But as I turned to go back inside, I noticed footprints, fresh, wet ones, on the porch boards. They led up from the direction of the creek, bare feet, long strides, and they stopped right at the door. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I walked down to the creek. The fog was still hanging low, thick enough that I could barely see the opposite bank. The ground was soft with mud, but I didn't see any more footprints. What I did see, though, made my stomach twist. A small wooden cross stuck into the bank, half buried. No name on it, just a date carved in crudely with a knife. Oct 2018, 2 years earlier to the month. That night I tried to ignore the noise outside, kept my headphones in while I read. Around 2:15 a.m., Boone, my uncle's dog who'd stayed with me, started whining at the window. I pulled the curtain back and my blood ran cold. There was a figure standing on the opposite bank. I could barely make it out through the fog, but it looked like a man, tall, thin, wearing soaked clothes that clung to his body. His head hung low and he was standing perfectly still, facing my cabin. I grabbed my flashlight, hands shaking, and shined it toward him. He was gone. The beam cut through empty fog. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but Boone kept whining and pacing, staring at the same spot. And then the voice came again, louder, right over the sound of the creek. "Please, help me. It's cold." It wasn't just in the distance this time. It sounded like it was coming from under the bridge. I backed away from the window, my heart slamming. Boone started barking, but then whimpered, tail between his legs. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and sat frozen on the couch until dawn. When the sun finally came up, I went outside to check, against every bit of common sense I had. I crossed the bridge, half expecting to see someone waiting there. But what I found instead were wet footprints again. Only this time they started from under the bridge and led back toward the water, and then stopped midstream, as if whoever made them had just sunk beneath the surface. Later that day, I drove into town and asked a woman at the small gas station if she knew anything about the cabin's history. She gave me a strange look and said, "That the one by the creek? Folks don't stay there long. Man drowned himself there a couple years back. Never found his body." That night, my last night, I didn't even try to sleep. I kept all the lights on, every window locked. Around 3 a.m., as I sat there trying to stay calm, the sound of the creek suddenly changed. It grew louder, like the water had risen. And over it came that same voice again, only this time closer than ever. "It's warmer here. Come down." I didn't look outside. I just grabbed Boone, got in the truck, and drove. I didn't even bother to take my bags. 2 days later, my uncle called me. He'd gone up to check the cabin and said the creek had flooded overnight from heavy rain. The little bridge had been washed away completely. He also said something else that made my stomach drop. He'd found muddy handprints on the porch railing, handprints too far apart, too high up to belong to anyone standing on the ground. I've never been back. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I'll play creek sounds on YouTube to calm myself. And every now and then, buried deep in the rushing noise, I swear I hear it again. That soft, broken whisper, "Come down." The window facing the woods. My name's Aaron, and I grew up in the Appalachian foothills of western North Carolina. My grandparents owned a small cabin there, a one-story wooden structure with green shutters, a tin roof, and a single large window that faced the forest out back. As a kid, that window fascinated me. The view was beautiful in the daytime, endless trees, sunlight flickering through the leaves, but at night, it turned into a black mirror that reflected your face and nothing else. I stopped visiting after they passed away. The cabin sat empty for years until autumn of 2021, when I decided to spend a weekend there. I'd been going through a bad breakup and thought being in nature might clear my head. I hadn't been back in nearly a decade. When I arrived, the road was so overgrown I almost missed the turn. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Paint peeling, roof sagging a little, a layer of dust coating everything inside. But it was peaceful. The air smelled of pine and rain. I unpacked, made some tea, and settled in. By nightfall, the forest outside had gone completely still. No crickets, no wind. Not even the usual hum of night insects. Just silence. The only light came from the moon spilling through that big window in the living room. I remember sitting there reading when I first noticed it, the faint sound of tapping on the glass. At first I thought it was a branch, but when I looked up I saw something that made my heart stutter, a handprint, a perfect fresh handprint pressed on the outside of the window. I froze, staring. The print looked wet, like someone had leaned against the glass with damp fingers, but there was no one outside. Just the black outline of trees and my own reflection staring back. I tried to shake it off, told myself it must have been old, maybe from rain dripping in a weird pattern. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and went to bed. Sometime around 2:40 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No noise, no movement. Just that strange sense you get when someone's watching you. The air in the cabin felt heavier, colder. I lay still, listening. Then came the slow creak of floorboards, from the living room. I told myself it was the wood settling, But when I looked at the crack under my door, I saw something moving, a faint shadow passing by. Blocking the moonlight, my chest went tight. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. The shadow moved again, slower this time. I could hear the soft scrape of something against the floor like bare feet dragging slightly. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. The cabin sat too far into the valley. My car keys were on the kitchen table, maybe 10 feet from where the sound was coming from. I waited, trying not to breathe too loudly. After a few minutes, everything went quiet again. I finally gathered enough courage to open the bedroom door. The living room was dim, lit only by moonlight sneaking through the edges of the curtain. When I reached the window, I hesitated, then slowly pulled the curtain aside. There were 2 handprints now. One higher, one lower, both fresh, both facing inward. That meant whoever made them had pressed their palms against the glass from outside. Looking in, after I'd already drawn the curtain, I stumbled back, slammed the bedroom door, and pushed the dresser against it. I sat on the floor until morning, shaking, listening for any sound. At first light, I grabbed my things and left. But before I did, I went outside to check, part fear, part curiosity. The ground beneath the window was soft from rain. I expected footprints, but there weren't any. The dirt was undisturbed, except for one thing. Right beneath the window was a perfect handprint, pressed deep into the mud. The fingers were long, too long, and what chilled me most was that it was on the wrong side. The print was facing up, as if the hand had come from below the ground. I left that day and never went back. A few months later, my cousin, and who'd inherited the land, told me she'd decided to visit the cabin. She said she cleaned the place, replaced the curtains, even fixed the roof. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. You know what's weird? That window facing the woods, and it doesn't look out over the trees anymore. It faces a slope now. It's like the earth shifted over the years. There's nothing but dirt right outside it. If that's true, then when I saw those handprints, whatever was out there wasn't standing in front of the window. It was pressed against the earth trying to get out. The radio in the attic. My name's Luke, and this happened in October of 2016 near Clay County, West Virginia. I used to take long solo trips into the mountains to photograph abandoned places, old mining houses, forgotten churches, and that sort of thing. One weekend, a local I'd met told me about a hunting cabin, deep in the woods that hadn't seen a human in 20 years. He said it sat beside a dried-up creek, bed and still had all its furniture inside. Drove out early the next morning. Followed an old logging road until it turned to gravel, then dirt. By sundown, I found the cabin, 2 rooms, a collapsed porch, and windows thick with grime. The air smelled of wet leaves and rust. I set up my sleeping bag inside near what used to be the fireplace. My phone had no service, but that was normal out there. What struck me right away was the silence. Even the woods felt muted. No birds, no wind, just the faint tick of cooling metal from my car outside. While exploring the cabin with my flashlight, I found a narrow set of stairs leading to the attic. The steps creaked and dust swirled in the beam as I climbed. The attic was small, cluttered with boxes and old hunting gear, but on a shelf in the corner sat an antique radio, about the size of a bread box, bakelite casing, broken dial, frayed cord. It looked dead. Still, when I touched it, I swear I felt a vibration, faint like the hum of distant power. I laughed at myself, brushed it off, and went back downstairs. That night, around 1:50 a.m., I woke to a faint sound. Not wind, not rain, voices. They were coming from above me. At first it was static, soft and distant, then words started to form. 2 people talking in low tones. I couldn't make them out, but they sounded old, the way recordings from the 1940s do. I froze, listening. After a minute, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed back up the stairs. The attic was dark except for the moonlight bleeding through a crack in the roof. The radio was on, the dial faintly glowing orange, static crackling. But it wasn't plugged in. I stood there, heart hammering as the voices grew clearer. "A woman first, don't open the door yet." Then a man. "Urgent, he's already downstairs." The sound distorted into static again. I backed down the steps, staring at that glow through the crack of the attic floorboards. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By daylight, the radio was silent and cold. I even checked. No batteries, no wiring, nothing that could power it. I told myself it had to be some residual charge or maybe a prank someone set up long ago. That evening, as dusk settled, I lit a small fire in the hearth. Around 2:30 a.m. I woke again, not to static this time, but to the sound of footsteps above me, heavy and deliberate. I froze. The attic floor creaked once, then again. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, the radio came alive a second time, louder now, filling the whole cabin with its hiss. The same man's voice came through. Trembling this time, he's not outside anymore. Then silence. A moment later, something knocked. 3 sharp raps on the attic floor directly above my head. I bolted. I didn't stop to grab my camera or jacket. I jumped into my car and tore down that dirt road, gravel pinging off the undercarriage. I didn't return until 2 days later with a friend who wanted to see it for himself. When we got there, the cabin looked the same except for one detail. The attic door was open. We went up together. The radio was still on the shelf, but now its speaker grill was missing, torn clean off. Inside, where the speaker should have been, was a layer of blackened dust and a single old photograph wedged behind the wires. A man and woman standing beside that very cabin. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "Don't open the door, I've never gone back. But sometimes when I'm scanning through static on my car radio late at night, I'll hear a flicker of a voice under the noise. A woman's whisper, almost drowned out by the hiss. He's already downstairs." The Thing Under the Floorboards. My name's Chris, and this happened in November of 2018 near the edge of the Appalachian Plateau in Virginia. I was traveling through the region for a construction job, staying in cheap motels most nights. One weekend, everything nearby was booked because of a hunting festival, so my foreman arranged a rental cabin through a local contact. Just a couple nights. Nothing fancy. It was about 10 miles off the main road, at the end of a narrow dirt trail that twisted up into thick woods. The cabin was small, one room with a wood stove and an uneven floor that slanted slightly to one side. When I stepped inside, I noticed a faint smell of earth and mildew, like wet soil. The owner, an old man named Vernon, handed me the key and said, "Don't worry if you hear scratching at night. It's the wood settling." He said it with a straight face, but something in his tone sounded like a warning. The first night was fine. I cooked some canned chili on the stove, read a few pages of a paperback, and went to bed early. Around 2:25 a.m., I woke up to a strange creaking sound. At first, I thought it was wind against the cabin walls, but then it came again directly under the bed. Creak, scrape, shuffle. It was a slow, dragging movement, like something heavy sliding across the dirt below the floorboards. The cabin didn't have a basement, just a narrow crawl space about 2 feet high. I froze, listening. The sound moved from beneath the bed to the far corner, then back again, like something pacing under the floor. I leaned over and shined my flashlight at the cracks in the boards. Through one gap, I thought I saw movement, just a shadow shifting. But when I looked again, it was gone. I stayed awake until dawn, telling myself it had to be an animal, maybe a raccoon or stray dog. The next day, I looked around outside, but there were no signs of burrows or holes under the cabin. No prints, no disturbed dirt. The crawlspace entrance was covered with a wooden grate nailed shut. That night, I didn't even try to sleep early. I kept a small fire going and sat at the table writing notes for work. Around 1:40 a.m., the sound started again, louder this time. Scraping, then a hollow thump like a fist hitting the floor from underneath. I shouted, "Hey, get out of there!" The noise stopped for maybe 5 seconds. Then came a slow, deliberate knock from directly below my chair. That was enough. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The night air was freezing, the woods dead silent except for the crackle of the fire inside. I crouched near the side of the cabin, shining the light under the edge. The crawl space was pitch dark. Then something moved. 2 pale hands, human hands, pressed up against the inside of the floorboards. The wood flexed slightly under the pressure, dust sifting through the cracks. I stumbled back, heart slamming, but by the time I looked again, the hands were gone. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the corner until morning. When the sun came up, I packed my gear and waited for Vernon to show. When he did, I told him straight. "Something's living under your cabin." He stared at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "That ain't livin'." He walked to the crawlspace entrance and pried the grate loose. The smell hit us instantly, rot and damp earth. He shined his flashlight inside, then sighed. Beneath the floorboards was a small hollow, and in it, a wooden coffin, half buried in dirt, the lid cracked open. Inside was nothing but a few scraps of decayed fabric and an old photograph, damp and stuck to the wood. He pulled it out, wiped it clean. It was a picture of a little boy, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of that same cabin, smiling. Vernon said his grandfather built the place in the 1930s. His little brother had gone missing when they were kids. They never found him. After that, the family sealed the crawl space. Vernon nailed the grate shut again and told me I could stay one more night if I wanted. I didn't. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The morning light cut across the cabin, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement through the floor-level vent, a pale hand, reaching toward the light, then vanishing into shadow. I've slept in a lot of rough places since, but I've never forgotten that sound. The slow, steady scraping under the floor like someone trapped in the dirt, still trying to claw their way out. The visitor at mile marker 12. My name's Amanda, and this happened in October of 2017, somewhere deep in the Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina. My boyfriend Jake and I were on a weekend road trip, planning to take the scenic route through the Blue Ridge Parkway before heading back to Asheville. The drive had been peaceful all day. Orange leaves, fog rolling low over the trees, that cold autumn air that smells like pine and smoke. But around 9:30 p.m. the weather turned fast. Rain came down hard, thick and silvery, and fog swallowed the road ahead. The GPS froze, showing nothing but a blinking blue dot, and our phones had zero signal. We decided to pull off when we saw a small gravel turnout near mile marker 12. The plan was to wait out the storm, maybe nap for an hour. But within minutes, the car started to feel like an icebox, and the battery indicator dipped low. We'd been running the heat too long. Then, through the mist, we saw a light, a small, warm glow flickering through the trees on the other side of the road. It looked like a lantern or maybe a cabin window. Jake said, "Someone's got to live out here. Let's ask to use their phone." I wasn't thrilled about wandering into the woods in the middle of a storm, but sitting in a dead car on a mountain road felt worse. So we grabbed our jackets and crossed the road, following a narrow path that led into the trees. It couldn't have been more than 50 yards before we saw it. A small wooden cabin, the kind that looked half forgotten. The light we'd seen came from a kerosene lantern hanging just inside the window. The front door was slightly open, creaking as wind pushed it back and forth. Jake called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" No answer. Just the sound of rain hammering the roof and the faint hiss of the lantern. Inside, the place was old but tidy. A wood stove, a single bed, a rocking chair. No electricity. It smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. A jacket hung on a hook by the door. An old brown coat that looked recently worn. Jake said, "Maybe they stepped out. I'll leave a note." While he rummaged for a pen, I noticed something odd. Muddy footprints on the floor, not just near the door but circling the room, dozens of them overlapping, and every single one pointed inward, toward the bed. The blanket on the bed was pulled tight, but the shape underneath looked strange, too tall, too uneven to just be blankets. "Jake," I whispered. "Something's not right." He turned toward me, confused, and that's when the door slammed shut behind us. We both jumped. Jake ran to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked, just stuck, as if something heavy was pressed against the other side. The lantern flickered, the flame shrinking to a pinpoint. The temperature dropped fast. I could see my breath in the air, and then we heard it. A sound coming from beneath the bed. A wet, dragging breath. Jake took one cautious step forward and crouched down, shining his phone's flashlight underneath. I'll never forget his face when the beam hit whatever was down there. He backed up so fast he fell. "Amanda, get out!" Before he could finish, something crawled out from under the bed. It wasn't standing upright. It moved on hands and knees, its joints popping like twigs. Its skin was gray, thin as paper stretched over bones. Its eyes, they weren't eyes at all. just hollow sockets glistening dark. It crawled toward Jake, fast and jerky, the sound of its limbs scraping the wooden floor like nails on glass. Jake swung the lantern at it, and it shattered, spilling oil across the boards. The flame caught instantly, roaring up in a flash. We didn't even try the door again. We ran for the window, smashing through the glass with our arms. I remember hitting the cold ground outside, my palms bleeding, rain sizzling as it hit the fire behind us. We sprinted through the woods until we found the road again, soaking wet and gasping for air. Our car lights flickered weakly, but it started on the first try. We drove all night until we hit a gas station around dawn. The attendant said there were no cabins near mile marker 12. The nearest property was 5 miles north. Later that week, I checked Google Maps, zooming in on that area. There was nothing, just trees. I don't know what that thing was or who it used to be, but sometimes when I'm driving mountain roads at night, I'll catch a faint light flickering in the woods. Just one steady glow, like a lantern swinging gently behind a window. And every time I see it, I feel that same cold air hit my lungs, like the mountains are still holding their breath, waiting for us to come back. The voice in cabin 6. My name's Luke, and I've been a forest ranger in the Appalachian region of eastern Tennessee for about 12 years now. Most of the time, my job is peaceful, checking trails, clearing debris, keeping campers from getting lost. But in late October of 2019, I was assigned a solo overnight shift at one of our older outpost cabins, Cabin 6, deep in the national forest. Cabin 6 isn't used much anymore. It's about 8 miles from the main station, up an old maintenance road that's been half swallowed by roots and erosion. It doesn't even have cell reception, just an old two-way radio for emergency contact. I'd been there once before, years ago, and I remembered it feeling off, the kind of place that seems too quiet, like the woods are listening. It was a cold evening, around 7:45 p.m., when I got to the cabin. The air smelled like damp pine needles and wood smoke. Inside, everything was still. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight. I started a small fire in the stove, unpacked my gear, and radioed the main ranger station to check in. Station, this is Ranger 312 at Cabin 6. I'm in for the night. Over. A crackle came through the speaker. Copy that, 312. Stay warm up there. Over. Everything was normal. For the first few hours, I worked on my reports, then stepped outside to stretch my legs. The forest was dead silent. No crickets, no owls, just wind whispering through the trees. When I came back inside, I noticed the fire had burned lower than it should have. That's when the radio clicked on by itself. Static, then a faint voice. It was weak, distant, but I recognized it instantly. It sounded like me. Station, this is Ranger 312 at Cabin 6. I'm in for the night. Over. The exact same words I'd said earlier. Same tone, same rhythm. I froze. The fire crackled softly behind me. I grabbed the receiver and said, "Who is this?" "Identify yourself." Silence. Then static again. I figured maybe the signal had bounced or repeated somehow. Old equipment can be weird that way. I shut the radio off and went back to my notes, trying not to think about it. Around 2:10 a.m., I heard the transmission again, this time faint but clear. Even though the radio was turned off, the speaker hissed to life. "Don't stay there, Luke," my full name. The voice still sounded like mine, but thinner, like it was being played through layers of static. I turned the knob to off again, but the sound kept coming, even as the power light dimmed out. The words were barely audible now, whispers beneath the static. "It's already in the walls." That's when I noticed something. Behind the stove, near the back corner, the wall was bulging slightly, like something was pressing against it from the outside. I stepped closer, flashlight trembling in my hand. The wood was shifting, slow, subtle, as if something inside the wall was breathing. The air grew heavy, cold enough that I could see frost forming around the nails. Then the radio blared again, louder than before. "Get out." The wall split open. Just for a second, I saw it. A hand, pale and thin, pushing through the gap in the boards. The fingers were long, stretching too far, the nails black with dirt. It reached toward me, grasping blindly. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair, and bolted for the door. The cold outside hit me like a wall. I ran straight down the trail, flashlight bouncing wildly. I didn't stop until I reached the truck at the base of the road. When I radioed the station from there, my hands were shaking. They sent another ranger to check it out. The next morning, he called me and said cabin 6 was fine. The walls were intact. The radio worked normally, but he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He said the logbook, on the desk, the one every ranger signs when they arrive, had 2 entries for the night of October 23rd, both under my name, both in my handwriting. The first read, Ranger 312, arrived at cabin 6, 7:45 p.m. The second one, written below it in the same ink, said Ranger 312 never left. They decommissioned cabin 6 a few months later. No one's been assigned there since. Sometimes when I'm working night shifts in the watchtower, I'll tune the radio just to fill the silence. And every so often, through the static, I still hear that faint echo, a tired voice, soft and far away. Station, this is Ranger 312 at cabin 6, and I always switch it off before it finishes. The thing that knocked twice. My name's Brian, and this happened in the fall of 2016, when my wife and I decided to take our 2 kids on a long weekend trip through rural West Virginia. We found a small rental cabin online, rustic, cheap, and supposedly quietly secluded. That last part sold me. After years of city noise, I wanted silence. The drive out there took longer than expected. Twisting mountain roads, no cell service, barely any signs of life. By the time we reached the cabin, it was nearly 8:45 p.m., and the woods were swallowed in fog. The place looked normal enough. Wooden porch, single story, a chimney puffing faint smoke from the fireplace the owner had apparently lit for us. It smelled like pine and dust when we stepped inside. The kids, Ben 9 and Ellie 7, ran to explore the loft while my wife Marissa started unpacking groceries. It was cozy in that old Appalachian way. Mismatched furniture, creaky floorboards, the sound of the wind threading through the trees. The first night was peaceful. We roasted marshmallows, played cards, listened to the quiet hum of crickets outside. By 11:30, the kids were asleep, and Marissa and I turned in not long after. Then sometime around 2:40 a.m., I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The fire had died down, leaving the room dark except for the faint orange glow of embers. Then I heard it, a knock at the door. 3 slow, solid thuds. I sat up, listening. Marissa stirred beside me. Did you hear that? I whispered. She nodded. Maybe the owner? I glanced at the clock again. 2:43 a.m. Too late for that. I got out of bed and crept toward the front door. The knock came again, this time softer, more deliberate. Hello? I called. Who's there? Silence. Then, after a moment, a voice that sounded wrong. It's Brian. I froze. It was my voice. The same tone, same pitch. Marissa sat up on the bed, wide-eyed. Brian, what the hell was that? I didn't answer. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and shined it through the front window. But the fog outside was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the porch. Then came another knock. Louder now. Let me in. I forgot the key. That voice again. Mine. I stepped back from the door. My heart was hammering. That's not funny, I yelled. From the loft, Ellie's small voice called down, Daddy? Why are you outside? She was pointing toward the window facing the tree line. I spun around, shining my light in that direction, and saw it. Something was standing at the edge of the trees, tall and pale, shaped roughly like a man, but not. Its face was blank, almost smooth, and its arms hung wrong, too long. It tilted its head when the light hit it, like it was studying me. Then it spoke again, same voice, same inflection. Let me in, Marissa. It's cold out here, Marissa gasped, clutching the kids. Brian, that's your voice. I grabbed the rifle the owner kept mounted above the door, unloaded, of course, and shouted, You need to leave. Right now. The thing didn't move. It just knocked again, twice this time. The sound echoed through the cabin, hollow, heavy, too precise. Then in perfect unison, the knock repeated, and from the back door, whatever it was, there were now 2 of them. I grabbed my family and ushered them into the small back bedroom. We locked the door and killed the lights. I could hear the footsteps circling outside, slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves. Then came the whispering, dozens of overlapping voices. Mine, Marissa's, the kids. All speaking at once, distorted and faint. Let us in. It's cold. Please, Daddy. Ellie started crying quietly, and I held her tight. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. At some point, everything went silent again. The fog outside thinned just enough to let the moonlight filter through the window, and then came the final knock. Soft, almost polite, directly against the bedroom wall beside my head. We didn't move until the first hint of dawn turned the sky gray. When I finally opened the front door, there were footprints in the dirt, not human ones, but long, narrow impressions, like something had dragged its hands as it walked. The owner came later that day to check in. I told him what happened. He looked tired, unsurprised. You heard the knocking, huh? He said quietly. Should have mentioned that. Folks up here say it's the mountain echo. Others say it's what lives behind it, he half smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. We left that morning and never went back. Sometimes, when it rains hard enough to drown out the city noise, I'll swear I can hear it again. 2 slow knocks, perfectly spaced like something remembering me. The last logbook entry. My name's Ethan, and I used to spend a lot of time solo hiking and camping through the Appalachian Mountains, mostly in North Carolina and Tennessee. I wasn't a survival expert or anything, but I'd done it enough to be comfortable alone in the woods. This story happened in October of 2020, about a week before Halloween. I was following an old trail system in the Pisgah National Forest, aiming to reach a fire lookout that hadn't been manned in decades. I'd seen photos of it online, a rusted steel tower half collapsed, surrounded by endless forest. But what I didn't know was that the map I was using also showed an old ranger outpost a few miles away from the tower, a small cabin that hadn't been listed on any recent maps. I figured I'd stop there for the night before finishing the hike the next day. I reached the cabin around 5:20 p.m. just before sunset. The place was small, 1 room, a broken window, and a sagging roof. There was a rusted metal sign nailed to the door that read, U.S. Forest Service, Station 4A, decommissioned. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and dust. There was an old logbook sitting on the desk, the kind rangers used to write daily reports in. The last entry was dated October 27, 1998, exactly 22 years earlier to the day. Most of the writing was mundane. Weather notes, wildlife sightings, trail closures. But the second to last entry caught my eye. Heard knocking again tonight. Same time, 3:07 a.m. Checked perimeter, no tracks. Must be wind through the boards. The handwriting was tight, rushed. Then the final entry, dated October 28, 1998, was only 1 line long. It found me. No signature. No follow-up pages. The rest of the logbook was blank. I remember laughing nervously to myself, thinking maybe it was a joke or some bored ranger's attempt to creep out whoever came after. Still, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. That night I set up my sleeping bag by the old stove and used my headlamp to read until I got tired. Around 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly, the kind of wake-up where your heart is already racing before you even know why. At first, everything was still. Then I heard it. Knock. 3 sharp raps on the wall beside my head. I froze, staring at the boards. The sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow and deliberate, like someone testing the wood. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer, just silence thick enough to feel. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it around the cabin. No one. The door was still bolted. My breath came out white in the cold air. Then I noticed something strange, the logbook on the desk. The pages were flipping on their own, slowly, one after another, though there was no wind. They stopped on the last page, and the one that said, "It found me." And then, below that line, something new appeared. The ink was wet, glistening in the beam of my light. "It found you too." I dropped the flashlight. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely breathe. I shoved everything into my pack and bolted outside. The forest was pitch black, the moon swallowed by clouds. But I could still hear it. The knocking, echoing faintly through the trees, following me. Sometimes close, sometimes far. Always 3 knocks. By the time I reached my car at dawn, I was soaked in sweat. The moment I started the engine, the knocking stopped. When I got home, I checked the Forest Service. Records for Station 4A. It was officially shut down after a ranger went missing in October of 1998. They said he walked off during a patrol and was never found. I went back online later to see if anyone else had written about the place. A few hikers mentioned the cabin. None had stayed the night. But one comment under an old forum thread caught my attention. It said, "Don't stay past 3:07 a.m. That's when it checks the walls." The woman in the windowless cabin, my name's Aaron, and this happened in January of 2022 in the mountains near Boone, North Carolina. I was a freelance writer working remotely back then, and I'd decided to rent a small cabin for a week to get away from distractions. It was one of those cozy-looking Airbnb listings, wood stove, one bedroom surrounded by snow and silence. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Lorna, gave me directions by email. She warned me that GPS might cut out a few miles before I arrived, and she was right. The road wound up through the woods, narrowing until it was just packed snow and ruts. When I finally found the cabin, the sun was already setting as around 5:20 p.m. It was smaller than I expected, but warm and clean inside. I noticed something strange, though. There were no windows. Not a single one. I figured it was for insulation or privacy, maybe some kind of remodel. The only light came from old lamps and the flicker of the fireplace. That first night was peaceful. I cooked a quick meal, poured some bourbon, and worked on my laptop until I got drowsy. I think I fell asleep around midnight. Sometime in the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. At first, I thought it was the roof creaking under snow, but the steps were too distinct, slow, measured, human. I checked my phone. 2:37 a.m. I listened for a while. The footsteps moved across the ceiling, then stopped right above my bed. Then a woman's voice, and soft, clear, right above me, said, "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice sounded calm, almost conversational, like she was standing in the room above me. But there was no upstairs. The cabin had one floor. I sat up, heart pounding, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The footsteps started again, this time moving toward the front door, and then silence. The next morning I checked outside. The roof was covered in untouched snow. No footprints anywhere. I told myself I must have been dreaming, maybe the wind or some trick of sound. But later that afternoon, when I checked the listing again, something felt off. The photos looked identical. Same furniture, same fireplace. But there was a window beside the front door in the pictures. A window that didn't exist in the cabin I was staying in. That night I didn't sleep easily. I left the fire burning and kept a lamp on. Around 3 a.m. I heard humming. A low, gentle tune coming from behind the wall near the stove. It was the same woman's voice. I whispered, "Lorna?" hoping the owner had somehow come by. The humming stopped instantly. Then from behind the wall the voice said softly, "That's not my name." The light flickered and the room went cold. I felt a pressure in my chest, that instinctive get-out-now feeling. I grabbed my coat, opened the door, and nearly tripped over something, a set of footprints in the snow leading to the cabin. But not away from it. Each print was small, bare, like someone had walked there without shoes in freezing weather. I followed them a few steps, shining my flashlight around, but they simply stopped at the tree line. No trail, no sign of anyone. When I came back inside, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The window. It was there now, right beside the front door. Frosted glass, thin curtains, just like in the listing photo. I swear it hadn't been there before. Through the fogged glass, I could see a faint light outside, like someone holding a lantern slowly moving closer. The light stopped just outside the window. I stepped closer, trying to see through the frost. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it clear with my sleeve, and there she was, a woman's face, pale and expressionless, inches from the glass. Her hair hung in wet clumps. Her eyes didn't blink. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, and then the light went out. The next morning I packed everything and left without looking back. When I reached the nearest gas station, I called the Airbnb number. A man answered. I said, "Hi, I'm trying to reach Lorna, the owner of the cabin I rented." He interrupted me. "Lorna passed away 2 years ago. That property isn't on Airbnb anymore. You must have got an old link." I checked my email, and the listing was gone. The messages, the receipt, everything. Sometimes I still think about that face in the window, and how it wasn't there until after I heard her voice. It's been 3 years. I'll never rent a cabin again. And every time I see frost on glass, I can't help but look twice, just to make sure no one's looking back. The creek behind cabin 13. My name's Luke, and this happened in October 2019, near Harlan County, Kentucky, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. My brother Evan and I grew up in Lexington, but we'd always heard stories from our grandfather about the hollers, quiet valleys where strange things lived in the woods. We never believed them, so when we both took a week off work that fall, we rented a cabin called Cabin 13. Yes, that was the actual name, listed on a small rental website. The pictures showed a rustic wooden structure surrounded by maple trees and a small creek out back. It looked peaceful. We arrived late on a Friday evening around 6:45 p.m. just before dark. The road up was steep and narrow, the kind where your headlights catch only trees and fog. The cabin itself looked exactly like the photos, except older. The paint faded, the porch warped. The host had left a handwritten note on the counter. "Welcome, Luke and Evan. Enjoy your stay. Please don't go near the creek after dark." We both laughed when we read it. Evan said, "Guess that's how they keep city folks from drowning." That night we cooked over the fire pit, had a couple beers, and listened to the forest hum around us. The air smelled of damp wood and pine. Around 11:30 p.m. I went inside while Evan stayed by the fire. I'd just started brushing my teeth when I heard him call out, a sharp, startled yell that cut through the quiet. When I stepped onto the porch, he was standing near the edge of the yard, facing the creek. "You see that?" he asked, his voice low. At first I didn't see anything. Then down by the creek I noticed a faint red glow rippling across the water. It wasn't from a flashlight or lantern. It looked like the creek itself was glowing, a dull crimson shimmer moving with the current. Evan took a step closer, but I grabbed his arm. "The note," I said. "It said not to go near the creek." He laughed it off, but something about that light, it wasn't right. The reflection didn't look like fire or anything man-made. It was almost thick, like blood swirling in water. We watched it for maybe a minute. Then it slowly dimmed until the creek was just black again. Inside, we joked about it, trying to shake the unease. Evan said it was probably some kind of mineral runoff or chemical reaction. But around 2:15 a.m., I woke up to a sound, splashing, heavy and deliberate like someone wading through shallow water. Evan was already awake, sitting up in bed. He whispered, "You hear that?" We both listened. The sound came from behind the cabin and from the creek. Then we heard something else. A low, bubbling gurgle like someone trying to speak through water. Without a word, we grabbed our flashlights and crept to the back door. The night was completely still. No wind, no crickets. Just the faint sound of running water. We shone our lights toward the creek and froze. The water was glowing red again, brighter this time, and something was standing in it. It looked like a person, maybe a woman, waist deep in the current. Her hair hanging over her face, her clothes clinging to her body. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent. She was facing upstream, motionless. Evan whispered, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned, not her head, but her whole body stiff like something moving underwater. When our lights hit her face, I felt my stomach twist. Her eyes were open but empty, white and clouded, and her mouth hung slightly open, trickles of red water spilling out. She raised one arm and pointed toward us, then sank straight down without making a splash. The red glow dimmed instantly, leaving the creek pitch black. We didn't sleep that night. At dawn, we checked the creek again. Nothing unusual, just clear water running over stones. We debated leaving, but curiosity won. Around noon, we followed the creek upstream, figuring we might find some explanation. After about a mile, we reached what looked like an old well, half collapsed and covered in moss. The stones around it were stained dark red. There were also carvings on the rocks, rough letters spelling "Do not drink." That night, we didn't see the glow again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been beneath the cabin listening. I kept hearing faint dripping sounds under the floorboards. On our last morning while packing up, Evan went out to dump the fire ashes by the creek. When he came back, he was pale. "Luke," he said, "there's something under the cabin." I followed him, crouching by the side. The foundation was raised about 2 feet off the ground. Lying there, half buried in mud, was a rusted metal bucket filled with water, or what looked like water. It was dark red, thick, and it smelled wrong. The bucket had a name etched on it, Sarah H. When we got back to town, I looked up the cabin's address. The property records showed it once belonged to a woman named Sarah Henley, who disappeared in 1963. Locals claimed she drowned herself in that same creek after her husband vanished. I called the rental number again, but it was disconnected. It's been years since then, but every so often, I dream about that creek, the way the water shimmered red under the moonlight, and in those dreams, I can still hear her voice and soft, bubbling, distant, "Don't drink." The thing that crawled out of the firewood shed. My name's Derek, and this happened in late November of 2020 in the mountains near Elkins, West Virginia. I've been a hunter most of my life. Whitetail, turkey, even the occasional black bear during the right season. I've spent plenty of nights alone in the woods, and I never scared easy. But what I saw that weekend, it still messes with my head. A friend of mine had access to an old hunting cabin that belonged to his uncle. It sat about 10 miles off the main highway, down a dirt road that barely existed anymore. He offered to let me use it for a weekend, said it hadn't been used in years, but it was still standing. I got there around 5 p.m. Friday evening. The sun was already sliding behind the ridgeline, and a cold fog hung low over the trees. The cabin was small, maybe one room and a loft. Out back was a firewood shed, half rotted and leaning, filled with stacked logs. I remember the air smelled heavy, damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Sour, almost metallic. Inside the cabin, everything was coated in dust. There was a single kerosene lamp, a cot, and an old iron stove. I swept the floor, lit the lamp, and unpacked my gear. I planned to hunt early in the morning, so I turned in early. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a faint scratching noise. It wasn't loud, just a soft, steady scrape from outside. I figured it was a raccoon getting into the shed. Then the scratching stopped, and I heard breathing, not animal breathing. Slow, heavy, and wet. Like someone with water in their lungs trying not to cough. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The woods were silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My breath came out in fog. The scratching started again, from the direction of the firewood shed. I shone my light on it, and something shifted inside. I caught just a glimpse, pale skin between the logs like a hand pulling back. "Hey," I shouted, stepping closer. "Who's in there?" No answer. Just that sound of breathing. I grabbed a piece of firewood and slammed it against the side of the shed. The noise stopped. I stood there for a few seconds waiting. Then from the far side of the shed, something knocked back. 3 slow, deliberate thuds, that was enough. I backed away, went inside, and bolted the door. I stayed awake till dawn, every nerve on edge. When daylight came, I forced myself to check the shed. The ground around it was covered in muddy prints, human-sized but wrong, too long, with toes that dug deep into the soil. The smell was stronger too, rot and metal like rusted blood. The inside of the shed looked normal at first. Then I noticed a hole in the dirt under the back wall, narrow but deep, as if something had been tunneling up from beneath. The logs above it were damp and dark, covered in a sticky film. I decided right then to leave that night. I didn't care if I bagged anything. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., I started packing up when I heard a low creak outside, like wood bending under weight. I turned off the lantern and listened. Something was moving between the shed and the cabin. Then came a voice, raspy, broken, almost like it was being forced through a throat full of water. Cold. Down there. It sounded close. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering. I could see movement outside. Something crouched, crawling on all fours, dragging itself through the frost. Its limbs were too long, bending wrong at the joints, and its skin, it looked like it had been burned. When it reached the porch, the boards groaned. I heard it sniff, slow and wet. Then it started to speak again, the words scraping out of its throat like gravel. "Let me in." "Fire's warm." I grabbed my rifle, aimed at the door, and yelled, "Get the hell away!" It went silent. Then, slowly, the doorknob started to turn. I fired through the wood, one shot dead center. The echo rolled through the valley. When I opened the door, nothing was there. No blood, no body, just a smear of black ash across the floorboards like something had burned from the inside out. I left before sunrise, didn't even take my pack. When I told my friend about it later, he got real quiet. Said his uncle had mentioned hearing digging under that shed years ago, thought it was groundhogs. But one morning he found all the logs stacked outside the shed, and a pit underneath filled with what he swore looked like human bones. They filled it in and sealed the floor. I went back through that area last year, just driving by. The cabin's gone now. Nothing but a patch of scorched dirt where it stood. But every once in a while, when the air gets cold and still, I swear I can smell that same metallic rot. And I can almost hear that voice crawling up from memory. Fire's warm. The screams from Dry Hollow. My name's Megan, and this happened in October of 2018 near Dry Hollow, a remote stretch of forest outside Ashe County, North Carolina. My boyfriend Ryan and I rented a small off-grid cabin there for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be peaceful. No service, no neighbors, just the two of us and the quiet of the Appalachian woods. The cabin sat on a ridge above a narrow valley. The Hollow, as the locals called it. The owner met us briefly in town to hand over the keys. I remember he looked uneasy when we told him we were staying 2 nights. He said, "Don't go down into the hollow after dark. Sound carries strange down there." We both laughed it off. We got to the cabin around 5:30 p.m., right as the sun was dipping behind the trees. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that smells like pine and wet leaves. Inside, the place was simple. 1 room, wood stove, a bed, and a porch that overlooked the valley below. You could see for miles, ridges fading into mist, the hollow stretching out like a dark scar between them. That first night we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, just listening. You could hear crickets, a faint trickle of water somewhere far below, and that deep silence that only mountains have. It felt perfect. Around 11 p.m., Ryan decided to test the echo. He shouted, "Hello!" into the hollow. The sound rolled through the trees and came back a few seconds later, faint and stretched. We laughed. He did it again. "Hello!" And the echo came back warped, almost like a mocking tone. But then, maybe 20 seconds later, we heard another hello. Quieter, but different. It wasn't his voice, Ryan frowned. "Did you hear that?" It came again, closer this time, from down in the hollow. "Hello." We stared into the darkness, the laughter gone. "Probably someone camping down there," I said, though I didn't believe it. We went inside and locked the door. Sometime after 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of screaming. Faint at first, then clearer, a woman's voice echoing up through the hollow. "Ryan," I shook him awake. We listened. The scream came again, long, ragged, and distant, like someone was yelling for help. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto the porch. "Hello, you okay?" he shouted. We waited. The scream cut off midway. Then, after maybe a minute, something answered. His exact words repeated perfectly. "Hello?" "You okay?" It didn't echo. It spoke. He lowered the light. "That's not funny," he shouted, trying to sound brave. The voice called back again, same pitch, same tone, his own voice, but wrong. Too slow, drawn out. "That's not funny." That's when I pulled him back inside. We barred the door with a chair and didn't sleep. When morning came, we checked the woods behind the cabin. The ground was soft from rain, but there were no footprints. No sign of anyone. We told ourselves it must have been echo trickery or maybe someone camping nearby. But that night it started again. Around 12:30 a.m., a new sound echoed up. Sobbing. Deep, choking sobs. Then a man's voice, desperate, hoarse. "Please, help me." Ryan gripped my hand and whispered, "Stay quiet." The sobbing turned into laughter. Wet, breathless laughter. Echoing through the trees like it was bouncing between invisible walls. Then, right outside the cabin window, the same voice whispered, "Stay quiet, I don't remember deciding to run. I just remember grabbing my coat, the keys, and bolting for the truck." The woods were pitch black except for our flashlights bouncing through the trees. I could hear footsteps behind us, slow, dragging like something was following just out of sight. When we reached the truck, Ryan dropped the keys. As he fumbled for them, I turned back, and in the faint glow of the cabin's porch light, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall, but the arms were too long, almost reaching its knees. The face, it wasn't a face, just shadow except for the mouth, wide, grinning, and open too far. It whispered again, perfectly mimicking Ryan's voice. "Don't go down into the hollow." We tore out of there so fast the truck fishtailed on the dirt road. When we reached town the next morning, we tried telling the sheriff what happened. He looked dead serious and said, "You weren't supposed to stay there overnight. Locals don't anymore. That hollow echoes what it takes." We never went back. Even now when I hear someone shout in the mountains, a hiker, a kid, I can't help but wait to hear what answers. And sometimes, faint and far away, I swear I do. "Hello?" The cabin that faced itself. My name's Mark, and this happened in March of 2021, somewhere along the Blue Ridge Parkway near the North Carolina-Virginia border. I'm a freelance photographer, mostly landscapes, abandoned places, and backroads Americana. I've spent years driving through the Appalachians, chasing that mix of beauty and quiet desolation that photographs so well. That spring, I found a listing on a local travel board for an isolated mountain cabin, perfect for photographers. It looked ideal, small, wooden, tucked into the forest with a perfect view of the ridge. The host's messages were polite, though oddly brief. The only line that stood out said, "Do not cross the clearing at night." I figured it was for safety. Wild animals. Maybe a drop-off nearby. I got there on a Friday around 4:45 p.m. The drive up was steep, fog rolling through the trees, everything that moody mountain light I loved. The cabin itself was cozy, one main room and a porch facing east toward a clearing. The trees had been cut back maybe 50 yards, opening a view of misty hills and endless forest, but something felt off. Across the clearing, through the haze, I saw another cabin. Same size, same shape, even the same stone chimney. For a second, I thought maybe there were two rental properties, but when I asked the host through text, she just replied, "There's only one." I stepped onto the porch with my camera and zoomed in. The second cabin looked identical, right down to the curtains in the window, except there was someone standing inside it. At first, I thought it was my own reflection. The windows had a mirror-like shine from that distance. But the figure moved when I didn't, a man, standing just beyond the glass, facing my direction. I snapped a few photos, thinking maybe I'd analyze them later, then went back inside. The wind picked up that evening, carrying that deep mountain silence that feels alive somehow. Around 11:30 p.m., I was reviewing my shots when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In each photo, the figure in the other cabin was closer to the window. In the last one, he was pressed against the glass, his face indistinct, almost smudged, like something had dragged its fingers through his features. Then I realized something worse. The lighting in the other cabin was exactly the same as mine, the same lamp placement, the same warm tone, and the man was standing in the same spot where I'd been when I took the photo. I turned slowly toward the window beside me. The clearing outside was pitch black except for a faint silver light of the moon. I could just make out the shape of the second cabin, faint but visible, and this time, the light inside it flickered on. I could see him clearly now, standing there. In the other cabin, holding a camera, facing me. My throat went dry. I lifted my camera again, zoomed in, and snapped another shot. The flash went off, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the other cabin's light went out. The clearing was empty again. I told myself I was overtired. Tricks of fog, reflection, whatever. I went to bed, left the lamp on. Sometime around 2:17 a.m., I woke up to the faint sound of a shutter click, click. Then again, click. Someone was taking photos outside. I got up slowly, every hair on my body standing on end. The clicking grew louder, sharper, until it was right outside the window. I pulled back the curtain and froze. A flash went off from across the clearing. For a second, everything was white. When the light faded, I saw the second cabin again, but this time both windows were lit. In the left one, I saw my reflection. In the right one, him. He was holding my camera. I don't know what happened next exactly. I remember stumbling back, heart hammering, the sound of wind screaming through the trees. I grabbed my keys and bag, barely dressed, and ran to my car. As I was starting the engine, I looked once more across the clearing and saw myself, standing on the porch of the other cabin, camera in hand, watching me drive away. The next morning, I checked the photos on my memory card. The last image, taken just before I fled, showed the other cabin completely gone, just an empty clearing. But in the corner of the frame, near the tree line, there was a figure walking away, half hidden in the mist. It looked exactly like me. I tried contacting the host afterward, but the number was disconnected. I even drove back weeks later with a friend using GPS coordinates from my photos. The dirt road ended abruptly, no cabin, no clearing, nothing but dense woods. But here's the part that haunts me. Sometimes when I'm editing photos late at night, I hear it again, faint and distant, like a memory pressing against my ear, click, click, and in the next frame I take, there's always a shadow that shouldn't be there.